Good day, and thank you all for being here. My name is Frank Atita. I'm the Vice President of Chime's Digital Health Insights Group, our content group, and co-producer of the show. I'm glad you're here. And there are a couple words that come up constantly now as it relates to cybersecurity, especially AI. One of them is governance, and the other is resilience. We have no greater authority than one of our sponsors, Noam Perel, who is the field CTO for data security at Rubrik. Has a distinguished background in cybersecurity. One of his highlights, and this is even more pertinent knowing the world of hacktivism. He spent over a decade of experience in the Israeli 8200 intelligence unit, bringing that experience to the challenges and difficulties that we have with cybersecurity today, especially as it relates to identity. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Noam, and we'll talk about identity security. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro there. So everyone, super excited to be being here today. We'll talk a bit about what resiliency means for Rubrik and how it really interconnects between identity and AI today. I'll share a bit more about my background, which could be relevant. So I joined Rubrik through an acquisition they made in the security space. And people ask me, well, how's the M&A been? And I think in a lot of cases, people tend to say, yeah, M&A, it was exciting, it's fine. For me, genuinely, I'm thrilled to be part of Rubrik. And what we're doing is super exciting and it's true privilege. So let's talk about what we're seeing in the industry as a whole today, and then cover what Rubrik does around that. Without further ado, let's kick off. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we're good.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So what we're seeing today, and one thing I'd like to get everyone thinking about is we're seeing that cyber spend is growing. So we're trying to put walls up. We're trying to prevent more attacks. But the attacks are actually, they keep growing. Cost of data breaches up, ransomware victims are up. Specifically, we're seeing that the identity in and of itself is under attack. So yes, I mean, if I say identity is the new perimeter, I'm sure participants will roll their eyes. So I won't say that, though it's true. What we're seeing is that the identity itself is not just the gateway into the data, it's not just the perimeter, but in and of itself is a target for attackers. We're seeing a lot of attacks targeting Active Directory, 600 million daily attacks on Entra. And when, it's not a matter of if, when you'll get breached and when you have an identity, an AD compromise, it takes 3 to 7 days to perform the forest rebuild, the AD Active Directory forest recovery. Now, in the health systems, I'm sure everyone's seeing this time and again, attack after attack after attack. And what it means, it's not just about that attackers are going after the data, but they're going after function business units. So it's actually impacting real world scenarios. And I think that the reason I'm hesitant, I don't want to just go over this list, but I think anyone in healthcare business knows what we're dealing with today. Now, if we think about the identity, you can see the identity as a gateway onto finding the path to the resources. But the way I like to think of it is that if your IDP is down, if your identity service is down, then nothing's reachable. And then if we think about the minimum viable hospital, identity is a foundational pillar. So if we got to leave today with one action item for anyone hearing us, it's Don't just think of the identity as a new perimeter and how do you put more controls over it. That's key, that's important. But really think what happens if the identity system itself is not available, is compromised. So what we're seeing as a common pattern in healthcare, and by the way, in other industries, is that we're seeing some initial compromise. We're seeing an identity, could be a non-human identity, a service account, some stolen credential. Starts with a compromise. And then the attackers, they start moving in and they move in laterally through the environment to try to expand and persist. And only then they can move in to deploy either ransomware or actually deploy malware that could take down your entire Active Directory. So we've seen that a lot. And again, not just healthcare, but in multiple segments. And the attacks are that once they get past your controls, once they get past your firewalls, they will use the replication of Active Directory against itself sometimes to make sure that the malware is existing on all of the domain controllers. And then once they want, they can detonate the malware, making your entire forest compromised, sometimes dysfunctional. So when we ask customers, what would you do in this scenario that gone past your walls, deployed malware, what would you do? So the answers we get, some would say, welcome to McDonald's, may I take your order? Some would say, I would just crawl into a fetal position. But we really get people thinking about this. What would they do in case of Active Directory for the entire forest being compromised, where you don't know where the attackers are? You don't really know where they gained persistence. So Microsoft does have a solution for this. It's a whole catalog. It's a documentation that if you try to print it out, the result is a 150-page manual. And you can go in and try to do this forest rebuild. By the way, Microsoft in the documentation, the assumption is you assume that the attackers are in. This is not just a disaster scenario and you're trying to recover from a disaster. This is a cyber recovery scenario. So this is when you really need to reset trust, reset everything when it comes to rebuilding the forest. So you can go to documentation. The problem is that it's super error prone, super cumbersome, and when you have all this pressure of your identity service being compromised, trying to go through all these manual steps is difficult. We're also seeing in terms of IDP adoption, it's not just about AD, we're seeing that many of our customers are hybrid customers. So they have both AD, Entra, and some have AD, Entra, Okta, and more, right? So we're talking hybrid. Now, when you think hybrid, think about the interdependency of your identity systems. What happens if you completely reset and rebuild your AD forest? You might create new ID, right? The invalidation of the RID pools if we want to get really technical. But let's keep it high level for now. Just think about the interdependency of your identity systems. And when we think Entra and this connectivity, hybrid recovery introduces its own challenges. So think about it when you're preparing for this resilience mindset. When we think resilience, it's not just about detecting the breach, finding it, and cutting them out, but it's actually making sure everything is up and running after the hit, after compromise. So that's resilience. It's really making sure you can recover your systems as part of that. Now, we have to address AI. So I want to share a really cool point of view that I saw, and there's two ways of looking at AI. And in a way, AI is here. It could be super intimidating, and we could be very worried. But if you can control the risk, then you have the power of using AI, utilizing AI fully. Now, if you can't control that risk, there's the natural disasters, there's the cyber disasters, but then the next risk is really agents going rogue. It's agents accidentally deleting your databases, agents accidentally changing your systems to a way that you can't control, can't recover. And I think it was Todd that mentioned, right, a few minutes ago, he mentioned, consider agents as humans. I'd even add to that. Consider agents as infinite number of humans, right? They have a superpower. They don't need to rest. They don't have a working day necessarily. So really address that when you think about your agents. So when we think about agents, when they'll run our business, they will have access to data and they will assume an identity. And this poses a challenge to many of our customers. A, how do we know what data they have? And if that agent has access to this data and it goes rogue, can we recover this data? And which identity is this agent using? So the identity and AI challenges that we're seeing is visibility. Starts with visibility, just knowing which are your non-human identities, which are your users. We still have a lot of customers with challenges knowing which service accounts they have in the environment. And then are they misconfigured? Do you have 10-year-old passwords that have not been rotated for these service accounts? What is their exposure? And then we see monitoring being a challenge. How do you make sure that there's no privilege escalation? How do you make sure that they have only read-only data access? And how do you actually check that your identity systems are not being tampered or changed with, such as GPO monitoring? And lastly, when we think of recovery, is how do we rewind, recover all these actions, whether it be a malicious actor targeting our identity, whether it be an agent going rogue? How can we go back to a good known state of our identity, of our data? So these are the challenges that we're seeing today. Now, I would like to introduce what Rubrik is doing, where we think that resilience is a key aspect of security. And again, I think a lot of people are using this term resiliency. For us, resiliency, you have to start with being able to recover. You have to assume breach. And if your identity systems, if your systems and data is compromised or being held ransom, how can you recover those? And how can you not just recover, how can you recover to a good known state? Another concept is rolling back or rewind. If an agent did X number of ops on data stores, on, say, a SaaS service like Salesforce, how can you rewind the agent's actions? Right? So we're using our capabilities here, that we're a system of record, to say, hey, we can rewind the actions to a good known state. And lastly, if we see the non-human identities misconfigured, if we see a service account that is misconfigured, can we reset the password? Can we remediate that aspect of the identity? So that's the remediation. I'll pause here, see if there are any questions. Would love to answer anything that comes to mind.
I'm looking right now to see if we have any questions in the Q&A section, but we don't at this point. So,
Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you for having me.
This was
And
great. And I appreciate
yeah.
some of the new terms that we've all added here this afternoon.
Yeah,
As it relates to
yeah,
agents
yeah,
and so on.
I really
So
did not want to cover, terms of identity, the new perimeter. It's not. I think most people on the call know that this is the new perimeter, but it's all about the idea of really assuming breach. It's not about the if, it's when you'll be compromised, and then how do you bounce back as fast as possible? How do you get that downtime to an absolute minimum?
exactly. Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank Rubrik for their sponsorship. Greatly
Yeah.
appreciated.